Italy is home to four major criminal power structures, each operating like its own shadow state. On the island of Sicily, there is the Cosa Nostra, the group that first defined what the world imagines when it hears the word Mafia. In Naples and its surrounding regions, there is the Camorra, a fragmented and violent ecosystem that feeds on chaos. In the southern region of Apulia, the Sacra Corona Unita controls key maritime corridors linking Italy to Eastern Europe. And then there is the organization born in the mountains of Calabria, the Ndrangheta, widely regarded today as the most powerful criminal organization in the world. These groups do more than simply violate laws. They manipulate markets, infiltrate legitimate industries, and reshape entire sectors of the economy from the inside. To put their scale into perspective, the Ndrangheta alone is believed to generate more than 50 billion euros in annual revenue. But to truly understand how these organizations function, one has to look beyond violence and crime, and instead focus on strategy, geography, and power. Each of these groups plays the geopolitical game in its own way. Over the course of this narrative, we are going to break down exactly how that works. Italy did not just produce criminal organizations, it produced models of criminal governance. Each of the four mafias emerged from a different environment and solved a different problem, and the solutions they developed would later be exported far beyond Italy's borders. The Cosa Nostra, the Camorra, the Sacra Corona Unita, and the Ndrangheta are more than regional powers. They are templates of criminal innovation. The story begins in Sicily. The Cosa Nostra was the first mafia to truly master the art of power, not just through violence but through influence. Its defining characteristic was hierarchy. Sicily was divided into territories, each controlled by a family, and those families answered to a central governing body known as the Commission. This allowed the Cosa Nostra to operate almost like a parallel government, enforcing its own rules, resolving disputes internally, and regulating criminal markets. For decades, it embedded itself deeply within the Italian political system. Votes were exchanged for protection, public contracts were captured through kickbacks, and entire construction projects were quietly controlled. At its height, the Cosa Nostra did not merely corrupt the state, it negotiated with it. Yet the very structure that made it powerful also made it vulnerable. Centralization brought visibility, and visibility created targets. By the early 1980s, the Italian government recognized that the Sicilian Mafia had grown too strong to ignore. In response, it launched the most aggressive and coordinated assault on organized crime the country had ever attempted. The consequences for the Cosa Nostra were both immediate and lasting. Lengthy prison sentences removed key figures from the organization, while a wave of informants exposed internal hierarchies, operational methods, and chains of command that had previously been hidden. For the first time, authorities gained a clear picture of the Mafia's inner workings, enabling them to methodically dismantle its leadership. Although the Cosa Nostra survived this onslaught, it emerged permanently weakened. Its ability to dominate Italian organized crime, let alone project influence internationally, was significantly diminished. In the space left by its decline, another organization quietly prepared to expand. That organization was the Ndrangheta. While the Sicilian Mafia had operated in some ways like a political institution, the Ndrangheta functions more like a multinational corporation. Rooted in Calabria, one of Italy's poorest and most isolated regions, the group developed a structure fundamentally different from its Sicilian counterpart. Instead of relying on a rigid, centralized hierarchy, the Ndrangheta organized itself as a loose federation of family-based clans known as Ndri. Membership within these clans is inherited by blood, creating a level of trust that is nearly impossible for law enforcement to penetrate. Betrayal is not merely a violation of organizational rules, it is considered a betrayal of one's own family, with consequences that extend far beyond the individual. This structure made the Ndrangheta extraordinarily resilient. There was no single leadership to remove, no headquarters to dismantle, and no organizational chart whose exposure could bring the entire system down. Removing one clan barely affected the whole organization. This resilience allowed the Ndrangheta to expand quietly and methodically, avoiding public scrutiny while building international connections. While authorities remained focused on dismantling what was left of the Sicilian Mafia, the Ndrangheta was constructing something far more ambitious, a criminal empire that stretched across Europe and beyond. At the heart of this expansion was cocaine. In the modern era, cocaine has become the primary engine driving organized crime, and Europe has grown into one of the largest and most lucrative markets for the drug. The organization that controls the majority of that supply is the Ndrangheta. Their critical innovation was deceptively simple. Rather than relying on intermediaries and brokers, they eliminated the middlemen entirely. Trusted representatives were sent directly to South America, establishing long-term relationships with producing cartels in countries such as Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. These were not informal street deals, but structured business agreements involving bulk purchases and guaranteed volumes. By negotiating directly at the source, the Ndrangheta dramatically reduced costs while increasing reliability. But production was only one part of the challenge. The real difficulty lay in transporting enormous quantities of cocaine across oceans and borders without detection. Europe's prosperity is built on trade, and its ports are the arteries through which that trade flows. Every year, tens of millions of shipping containers pass through ports such as Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, Marseille, Valencia, Barcelona, and Gioia Tauro. Given this scale, authorities can inspect only a tiny fraction of cargo. The Ndrangheta exploited this vulnerability using a method known as the rip-on, rip-off technique. A sealed container carrying legitimate goods is briefly opened at the port of origin, loaded with cocaine, and resealed. The container then goes normally through the global shipping system. Upon arrival in Europe, the corrupt dockworker retrieves the drugs before any inspection can take place. Shipping companies remain unaware, paperwork appears legitimate, and even when some shipments are intercepted, the sheer volume ensures that profits continue. Italy's port of Gioia Tauro became a critical hub for this system, but northern ports in countries like the Netherlands and Belgium are now just as important, often working in tandem with local criminal networks. This is the point at which Italian organized crime transformed from a national phenomenon into a continental one. Across Europe, organized crime now functions as a network rather than a series of isolated groups. Balkan criminal organizations control key land routes and maritime corridors, moving drugs, weapons, and people with ruthless efficiency. Albanian groups, in particular, have become indispensable partners because of their discipline and logistical expertise. Eastern European networks contribute specialized skills, including cybercrime, fraud, and complex money laundering operations. In Western Europe, criminal organizations embedded in major logistics hubs manage storage, distribution, and street-level sales. Rather than competing endlessly, these groups increasingly cooperate, while Italian mafias, especially the Ndrangheta, provide capital, coordination, and strategic oversight. The result is not a single cartel, but a decentralized criminal economy spanning the continent. While the Ndrangheta dominates international trafficking, not all Italian mafias operate in the same way. In Naples and its surrounding areas, the Camorra has perfected a different model. Comprised of hundreds of rival clans with no central leadership, alliances within the Camorra shift constantly, and violence is frequent. Yet this apparent chaos is not a weakness. It allows the organization to thrive in dense urban environments where informal economies flourish. The Camorra embeds itself deeply in local markets, controlling counterfeit fashion, street-level drug sales, port smuggling, and, most notoriously, waste management. By offering cheaper and less regulated disposal services, Camorra-linked firms became the preferred choice for industries across Europe seeking to dispose of toxic waste. The profits were enormous, while the environmental consequences were catastrophic. As one former boss famously remarked, drugs carried too much risk, but garbage was pure gold. Further south, the Sacra Corona Unita, though smaller and younger than the other Italian mafias, became strategically vital because of its geography. Apulia sits directly across the Adriatic Sea from the Balkans, making the region a crucial smuggling corridor. Fast boats cross these waters nightly, carrying cigarettes, drugs, weapons, and migrants. By controlling these routes, the SCU controlled access. Anyone seeking to move goods through the Adriatic had to pay, positioning the organization as the gatekeeper between Balkan networks and Western European markets. All of this criminal activity generates enormous amounts of cash, and cash presents a problem. It attracts attention and cannot be used openly. To overcome this, organized crime relies on large-scale money laundering. The process unfolds in 3 stages. First is placement, in which cash is introduced into the financial system by mixing it with legitimate revenue from businesses such as restaurants, bars, and construction firms. Second comes layering, where money moves through shell companies, offshore accounts, currency exchanges, and complex asset trades to obscure its origin. Finally, integration allows the now clean money to re-enter the legal economy through real estate, loans, and investments. This is how organized crime wages economic warfare. During economic downturns, legitimate businesses struggle as banks tighten lending and credit dries up. Criminal organizations, by contrast, are never short on liquidity. They step in as lenders and buyers, quietly acquiring hotels, construction firms, logistics companies, farms, and entire supply chains. Over time, competition disappears and criminal monopolies take its place. The Mafia does not conquer the legal economy through violence, but through capital. The collapse of the Cosa Nostra did not mark the end of the Mafia. It marked a transition. The centralized structure that once made the Sicilian organization powerful ultimately became its weakness. The decentralized family-based system of the Ndrangheta proved far better suited to a globalized world. They adapted more quickly, expanded more quietly, and integrated more deeply than their rivals, and in doing so, they took over. Today, the Mafia no longer resembles the portrayals seen in movies. It wears suits, owns corporations, employs lawyers and accountants, and thinks in terms of supply chains, logistics hubs, and balance sheets. Italy remains the core of this system not because of myth or nostalgia, but because it produced the most resilient criminal institutions ever created. The evolution of the Mafia mirrors the evolution of modern power itself, decentralized, networked, and global.